I'm Nola Simon. I'm the host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. This is actually a test. This is a repurposed LinkedIn audio room that I recorded earlier today. So that's why you'll hear me introduce the room as well. And I recorded it just to see how that would actually work and see if I could repurpose it into a podcast. Now, I did not record any questions that I received. I turned that off before the recording actually started and before I invited anybody up to the platform. So you'll only hear me speaking in this. But I wanted to see how I could actually use an audio room like this and repurpose it into a podcast. Now, this is a summary of what it is that I do. I've been doing an experiment over the weekend, and I realized that people just don't actually understand what it is I do, and an offer that I've made to organizations who are looking to hire me, but they don't know me, and it's an intro project, a short little project that they can use to get to know me, because honestly, behavior change and the larger offers that I make for consulting take a long time, but it's a leap of trust to really trust somebody that you actually don't know to bring in and do that significant amount of change in your organization. So I thought that a shorter project might be a good intro, and that way you get to know me, you get to know the quality of the work and the recommendations that I make, and why not? Let's experiment. Anyway, so enjoy. I'd love to know any feedback you have, or if you can refer or recommend me to anyone who might be looking for this type of work. So thank you. Bye. And we are live. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Nola Simon. I am a hybrid remote futurist, but you may also know me as the host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence, or maybe you know me from somewhere else, not sure. But what I've noticed recently is a lot of people don't actually understand what it is that I do. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to really have a room about it, present about it, and run down a current offer that I've got with my work. So I had sent out an experiment to test the theory of weak ties. So the idea is that you can actually get more connections from the people who actually don't know you well. It's not necessarily going to be your friends, your family, the people who know you most intimately, who are going to be the best connections for business. This is a sociology theory that actually ties back, dating back to 1973. I wrote about it over the weekend. And the theory is you can send out notes to people that you don't necessarily know and see who they can actually introduce you to. But the reaction that I've got from people has actually been really positive, but a lot of them don't actually understand what it is that I do. So the upshot is I'm a B2B consultant, which means that I work with organizations, and I'm looking at hybrid remote and or distributed work. So what does that mean to people? So do you work in the office? Do you work partly from home, sometimes in the office? Do you work mostly at home? Do you work remotely? Can you work from anywhere? So not just necessarily where you happen to live, but could you travel across the country, work from a different province or state? Could you go and visit friends and work from their house? Could you go on a workation and have a vacation, but then also work after the fact? Or could you actually live from a different country 3 months out of the year and call that work from anywhere? So distributed work looks a lot of different ways to a lot of different organizations, and it's not just limited to that. But the feedback that I got from some of the notes that I sent over the weekend was people don't actually understand what distributed work means. So that's where I thought I would define it. Now, I also add in a futurist lens to this because the decisions we make about how we work, we're going to have to live with for probably a good 5, 10, 20 years at the very least. We've had very limited opportunities to ever redesign completely how organizations really work. And work from home is not new. Working remotely is not new. I personally have done it since 2011. But what is new is the sheer mass of people, the sheer volume of people who are interested in working that flexibly. And that's where organizations are looking at redesigning how they work and trying to understand how they go forward. So they might have significant real estate investments. They might have tried it during the pandemic. Some of it worked, some of it didn't work. They're trying to get that optimal mix of what keeps their people happy, what gives them the flexibility, what fuels the work to make the company successful, but also fuels the health and well-being of the employees and really devotes themselves to actually being set up for the future of work, because everything is constantly changing. Everything is in flux, basically. We don't exactly know what's going on. So really what it comes down to is what it is you want to. And the offer that I've got right now is a current state offer audit. So basically, we've been working this way. Many companies have been working this way for a very long time, but the pandemic changed things, and we've been trying to adjust and tweak. This is where you're starting to see like return to office mandates come out, where people are actually demanding that their staff come back in. They're monitoring badge swipes. They're threatening performance reviews if you're not actually complying with the office mandate, that sort of thing. So really, however you're doing your hybrid remote or workplace flexibility or distributed work, whatever you want to call it, it's good to know how it's going. And that's where current state audit comes in. I can come in, work with your company to understand what it is you're doing, what's going well, what maybe needs some attention, what things you might not have thought about. And it looks at everything because it starts with strategy, it starts with leadership, but then it also filters down into communication, how that's filling your storytelling as an employer, your employer brand, employee engagement, the processes and procedures. If there's cognitive bias that's really coming in, that really needs to be considered. Somebody actually just posted recently about Halloween. So, for example, tomorrow is Halloween. Generally, trick or treating on the East Coast of North America generally starts somewhere between 4 and 5 if you've got really little kids, because you want to get them out before it's dark. And if you've got a distributed team and you've got people all over the world, are you actually scheduling meetings right during that trick or treating thing? So if people with little kids don't actually feel, they might have some concerns about asking for that to be rescheduled because they don't want to give the perception that they're not working hard. So that's the type of distance bias where if you're in a different time zone, you might be scheduling things and not really considering how that impacts a lot of your team. Now, you've got a variety of people on your team. It might not impact everybody, but for those that it does impact, do they feel safe enough to speak up? So it filters into trust, that psychological safety. It's very well, it's embedded throughout the organization if it's going to be working well. So having an understanding of really what's working well can help you build your vision out for what it is you want it to be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And the decisions we make right now are really going to inform the future of work. And yes, you're going to be able to pivot, you're going to be able to change. It's not that you're stuck into one decision that you make right now, but if you set yourself up well from the beginning with a strategic plan, you can pivot, you can change and react to the realities of what's happening in the workplace. This is where it's actually worth investing in, because in terms of engagement, flexibility is one of the main things that employees are looking for. And engagement is an $8.8 trillion problem in the workforce. It's a stat that actually comes from the Gallup organization. And what that actually means is if you're having any kind of engagement issue in your workforce, it's not necessarily just related to you. It's a standard problem across all companies worldwide. So engagement hasn't necessarily really changed from pre-pandemic to now. That means that hybrid remote itself isn't necessarily the pure answer. So there's more going into that. But there's an impact to actually not getting engagement, and that's the cost of turnover. And you are going to have to assess that for your own organization. There are calculations that you can actually do to understand how much it actually costs to hire and replace somebody who actually leaves because they're not getting the flexibility or autonomy that they need in their work. But if you multiply that across employees, that becomes quite costly. So what's the cost of turnover? So it's the overall cost of engagement that's impacting all companies, but it's also the cost of turnover. So if you're investing a small amount, and all I'm asking is $10,000 for 4 weeks to come in and actually look at all of this, and what this will include would be like a strategic kickoff call with your executive management team, some imagination training. We look at that futurism aspect. I'll do an assessment of your employer brand and the communications that support that. And I'll produce an overall report and a final presentation of the current state and recommendations for future action, and also include a workshop that you can actually determine who would actually be best to attend, whether that's your executives, whether it's management, whether it's key decision makers, and also people of influence around the organization. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the people in charge, the people who have the most network influence. If you are any kind of researcher into network science, that there are silos often around organizations, and there are bridges between those different areas of the company. So who do you know in sales? Who do you know in marketing? Who do you know in accounting? Often there's one person or a few people who actually are really well connected, and they have relationships with a variety of people throughout the organization. So one person who isn't necessarily in charge could actually influence a whole bunch of people just because of their personality, how they work, and who they know and how they connect people. That's something that we can look at as well too. It would all be done fully remotely. It's asynchronous except for the actual kickoff call, the interviews, the final presentation, workshop. And I would be looking for the company to provide all of the data that you've already collected. So any surveys that you've done, any kind of engagement assessments, that sort of thing would be very useful to really give you an overview. And again, this sets you up well for 2024. And the thing about corporate budgets is if you don't actually use it, you often lose it, and then it's hard for you to build a case for why you actually need that money again the following year. So if you're working in organizational transformation, if you're working in HR, if you were a chief operations officer and you've been tasked with really engagement, tweaking the workplace flexibility, figuring out how all of that works, and you don't know who to turn to, or you have an idea, but you actually need facts and figures and research to back all of that up to set yourself up so that you have credibility and you have data and research and stories to bolster what it is you're presenting to your senior management to make yourself and your project successful. That's where I can help you. That's essentially what the offer is. Now, I'm recording this again as an experiment. I am going to post this part of it as a podcast just to test it out. So I'm going to actually stop recording that right now, and then I'm going to actually open it up to questions if anybody actually wants to come up on the stage and actually pose me any questions.